The Watchers call. From the darkness, we observe.
In real space, Admiral Lysan Cord's fleet maintains perfect formation, while their Geller fields hum at warp translation strength, bleeding impossible cold into the void. I am Interrogator Cassian Drail, Ordo Hereticus, recording this testimony from the boarding craft Sanctified Purpose as we approach the Oberon-class battleship Oath of Severance. The first rule broken burns in my mind like a brand. Those protective barriers should exclude the warp's touch, not contain it. Yet harmonic resonance pressing against our hull confirms the impossible. The barrier between reality and Imperium has inverted entirely, pressing inward rather than outward, caging something within rather than keeping something out. My chronometer stutters, losing exactly 39 seconds each time Admiral Cord's voice crosses command vox channels. The phenomenon repeats with mechanical precision, a temporal hiccup that defies every principle of Imperial chronometry. Life support confirms optimal atmospheric pressure throughout the boarding collar, yet my breath crystallizes in silver clouds that hang motionless in recycled air. The cold seeps through carapace armor like liquid nitrogen, settling in my bones with the weight of winter seas that have never touched this vessel's hull. 72 hours until the pilgrim convoy emerges from warp at Vigilum 9's edge, 17,000 souls carrying sacred relics to the shrine worlds beyond. 3 armsmen have vanished aboard the Oath of Severance, their locator runes showing impossible positions inside sealed bulkheads. Fleet formations, when overlaid on stellar cartography, trace geometric blasphemies, hexagrams nested within nonagons, patterns that suggest purpose beyond tactical deployment. The coordinates spell heresy in negative space. Telemetry, hull temperature, Oath of Severance, dropping in 9-degree intervals. Current, minus 18 degrees Celsius surface, minus 27 degrees Celsius, minus 36 degrees Celsius. Geller harmonics registering surge at translation band. Anomaly tag, inverted vectors. The boarding tube extends with consecrated precision, each servo step a litany against the void. Through reinforced viewing ports, I observe escort vessels maintaining formation with mechanical perfection. Destroyers Penitent Blade and Sacred Wrath hold coordinates that, connected by sightlines, form base angles of something vast and purposeful. The cruiser Divine Mandate hovers at the pattern's apex, lance batteries trained inward toward empty space that shimmers despite absolute zero. A faint litany echoes through the collar's metal walls, not transmitted via vox, but conducted through the ship's bones. On the 9th toll, the keel remembers. The words repeat in rhythm with my heartbeat, each syllable accompanied by soft percussion of metal expanding and contracting in temperatures that should not exist. My servo-skull memoriam records everything, microscopic stress fractures appearing and disappearing in patterns suggesting the Oath of Severance breathes. Sanctified. Purpose. This is Fleet Command. Admiral Cord's voice carries crystalline clarity, doubled by subharmonics that make my teeth ache. Interrogator Drail, you are cleared for docking. The Emperor protects. The transmission ends, leaving silence thick as grave dirt. Atmospheric readings fluctuate between normal and impossible, oxygen levels spiking before settling, as if the ship periodically holds its breath. The boarding tube seals engage with wet sounds of flesh meeting flesh rather than metal mating with metal. Pressure equalizes with a sigh, carrying scents of brine and machine oil. Impossible combinations, speaking of depths no Imperial vessel should contain. My Auspex registers 17 heartbeats beyond the airlock. Standard bridge crew complement, yet biosignatures pulse in perfect synchronization as if 17 hearts beat with single rhythm. Comms, fleet-wide command channel KORD.0-PRI active. Sanctified purpose chronometers report desynchronization, event -000:00:39, reset triggered. The airlock cycles open, revealing corridors lined with devotional banners hanging motionless despite air currents. Cherub servitors hover in alcoves, mechanical eyes tracking my movement, with expressions suggesting recognition rather than sensor function. Deck plates vibrate with harmonics matching the Geller field's impossible hum, frequencies that should exist only during warp translation, now bleeding into real space like infection through wounds. I step through the threshold, recording everything. The Ordo calls it discipline. It is also charm against dread. The first breath aboard tastes of oil, ozone, and salt. No ocean has ever opened mouths inside shipyard dreams, yet brine films my tongue. Deck plates feel subtly concave, as if whoever built this cathedral of war expected something heavier to occupy its nave. Through the boarding collar's speakers, my own voice emerges with my vocal patterns, my Terran accent, speaking words I have not yet formed. Fleet. Command. This is Interrogator Dryle, requesting immediate audience with Admiral Cord. Authorization Hereticus 779. The Emperor protects. The transmission carries my biometric signature, my soul print, yet I stand silent, lips sealed, watching my future voice request passage to meetings that have not occurred. Telemetry. Exterior thermal sensors continue 9-degree drop cadence. Structural resonance at keel, 9 Hz. Ambient auditory. Litany fragment cross-matched to pre-compliance Martian hymnal. Confidence, 37%. The receiving chamber opens with exhalation. No honor guard waits, no ceremonial bells. Sainted plaques sweat condensation, trickling against gravity's pull, pooling in scallops resembling geometric patterns I refuse to name. My footsteps echo back half beats early, as if punctual versions of myself already walk these corridors. Interrogator Dryle, Admiral Cord's voice echoes from internal Vox systems, warm and paternal, yet carrying undertones that crawl along my spine. The bridge requests your presence again. We have much to discuss before the 9th toll. The transmission ends with soft sounds of waves lapping shores that do not exist. I advance through corridors stretching longer than blueprints should allow, walking toward meetings I have somehow already attended, while behind me, the sanctified purpose retracts its umbilical with priestly discretion, leaving me alone with the ship that breathes and the voice that speaks my words before I think them. Sanctified decks stretch beneath my boots, where maintenance servitors have abandoned their litanies half-spoken. The blessed waters pool in corners, drying into geometric configurations that fold space into angles reality was never meant to accommodate. Each devotional swirl smears into non-Euclidean fracture lines as moisture evaporates, scriptural curlicues yawning into razor triangles that suggest corridors beneath the paint. The patterns hurt to observe directly, forcing my gaze to slide away like oil on glass. The absence builds louder than any alarm. No engine thrum vibrates through deck plates, though reactor readings confirm optimal power distribution. No crew chatter echoes from adjacent compartments, though biosignatures show normal complement. Only the distant 7-knock pattern repeats in the whole structure. Percussion transmitted through adamantine ribs like heartbeat through bone, each sequence ending with 2 additional knocks that arrive seconds after the others, as if something vast counts to 9, but forgets the final numbers. Flag Captain Severine Hallas awaits beneath the arch of the command transept, immaculate in navy black, aiguillette braided with thin vox capillaries. When she salutes, her voice emerges crisp and controlled. "Interrogator, welcome aboard," before warbling into Binharic cunt. Rapid clicks and static bursts, then snapping back to Gothic with an involuntary jaw twitch. "Bridge requests your presence by standing order." Her breath crystallizes despite wearing no void suit. Yet Bridge Auspex readings scroll temperatures 14 degrees below void suit tolerance, a paradox printed in green ink as if compliance with forms could tame impossibility. "Report fleet status and crew complement." My words carry measured ordo cadence, yet underneath lurks priestly dread, borrowed from too many heretical investigations. The bridge temperature should kill unprotected flesh, yet neither of us shivers. Our bodies have forgotten how cold works, accepting violation of thermodynamics as temporary inconvenience. Servo skulls dangle from rosary wire in formations that defy gravitational law, Mobius chains looped through themselves without twist points, bone cherubs eye to empty socket in 9-fold spirals. Each optic clicks open ahead of my approach like a choir inhaling at once, their mechanical eyes tracking movement with expressions suggesting recognition rather than sensor function. The tactical hololith dominates the bridge's heart fleet positions, pulsing as blue runes suspended in incense smoke that refuses to drift. Standard formation should show protective envelope around convoy approach vectors. Instead, viewed in negative space, where ships are absent rather than present, a 9-pointed recursion pattern emerges, corners aligning where no icons exist, a sigil drawn in void, coordinates using Imperial vessels as stylus points across star chart parchment. Telemetry, bridge atmospheric readings inconsistent. Temperature minus 14 degrees Celsius, pressure optimal, humidity 97%. Chronometer desynchronization continuing at 39-second intervals. Auspex returns timestamps out of order by 13 minutes. Summon Confessor Otho and Magos Engineer Gaius 17. Immediate attendance required. My orders carry inquisitorial authority, yet words echo back 13 seconds before I speak them. The bridge crew responds to phantom commands with mechanical precision, rehearsing ceremonies they have performed countless times. Confessor Bran Otho arrives first, robes rustling with sounds of parchment and dried flowers. His augmetic throat speaker gleams silver against pale flesh, vox grill inscribed with microscopic scripture that shifts when observed peripherally. Interrogator, blessed be your arrival. The ship has learned a prayer it will not cease whispering. His words carry weight of confession, as if admitting heresy that burns his tongue. Elaborate, Confessor. I activate recording systems, noting how servo skulls orient toward our conversation with mechanical interest. Otho's response comes in measured Gothic seeded with ecclesiastical dread, each word carefully chosen to avoid naming blasphemies directly. Since emergence, the whole structure conducts litanies through its bones. Not transmitted, conducted. The metal remembers prayers and repeats them without human intervention. I have performed 17 rites of silence. The ship acknowledges each blessing, then continues its whispered devotions. His augmetic speaker crackles with static that resolves into distant chanting, voices singing in languages predating Imperial Gothic. Magos engineer Gaius 17 enters through sealed maintenance hatches, tracked limbs muttering catechisms in oil-thick susurrus. Binary cant flows from vox speakers in measured streams, translation overlays carrying undertones of mechanical anxiety. Interrogator, blessed be the Omnis Hire's wisdom. Geller harmonics recalibrated per Admiral's keel rights. Containment protocols inverted by direct order. Field compression at 147% standard parameters, pressing inward rather than outward. Show me your data. Gaius extends a mechadendrite-like reluctant finger. His response triggers immediately. Too immediately, as if anticipating questions before my arrival. Data contamination by tides, mnemonic drag, harmonics pressing in, not out, to preserve interior resonance. Comms, phantom reply detected on command frequency. Response precedes query by 9 seconds. Content. The keel remembers blood. Source. Unknown. On a maintenance slate, forgotten by a rating, who might have fallen into his own footprint, I discover new paint over old prayers, flaking red ochre script spells in unsteady hand. The keel remembers blood, repeated in 17 different languages, including several predating human spaceflight. The text appears and disappears like tide marks on digital shores, leaving ghost impressions that burn when observed directly. Confessor, when did these manifestations begin? My voice carries ordo authority, while dread grows beneath. Otho's response comes in whispers that make servo-skulls orient with mechanical attention, optical lenses dilating to capture words too soft for human ears. Immediately following emergence, interrogator. Admiral Cord performed the keel litany personally, blessing the ship's bones with his own blood. Since then, the vessel remembers. It recalls prayers we have not taught it, responds to commands we have not given. His augmetic speaker fails mid-sentence, static resolving into ocean sounds, waves lapping shores that should not exist in void-locked chambers. Priority klaxons chime with crystalline clarity, notes forming harmonic progressions, suggesting ecclesiastical rather than military origin. Admiral Cord's voice emerges from bridge speakers with warmth that makes frost patterns crawl across viewing ports. Interrogator Dryle, please join me in the strategium for private audience. We must speak before events repeat themselves. The strategium hatch unseals autonomously, releasing winter breath that carries scents of brine and machine oil. Beyond the threshold waits darkness, pregnant with possibility, air thick enough to taste. The transmission carries my biometric authorization codes, though I have issued no such permissions. The Admiral requests your immediate attendance, Hallis repeats, though her lips remain motionless. Words emerge from bridge speakers in her voice, carrying inflections of conversations I remember attending, yet know I have never experienced. The tactical hololith updates fleet positions, coordinates shifting to complete patterns drawn in negative space across star charts that bleed geometry into reality's margins, while servo skulls arrange themselves in formation, suggesting honor guard rather than mechanical oversight, their optical lenses glowing like votive candles in cathedral gloom. The Strategium Chapel transforms tactical necessity into devotional architecture, where holographic tactical icons float like votive candles suspended in air thick with sanctified oils. Incense smoke defies atmospheric circulation, curling against airflow into sigils that burn the retina when observed directly. Geometric blasphemies suggesting meaning beyond Imperial symbology. Patterns that fold space into configurations reality was never meant to accommodate. Each attempted focus sends sharp pain behind my eyes, as if the symbols resist comprehension by mortal. Mine's Admiral Chord's presence fills the chamber without physical manifestation, a gravitational pressure that tilts deck plates by measurable degrees. My boots find purchase on surfaces that should be level, yet slope toward an invisible center of mass. The sensation builds like standing, too close to a neutron star's event horizon, where space-time bends around concentrated authority. He is here without being here, a weight that makes servo-skulls orient toward empty air with mechanical reverence, their optical lenses tracking something my augmetic eye cannot register. The ship's scriptorium adjoins through arched passages lined with devotional alcoves. Inside, I discover servitors frozen solid at their writing desks, quills clutched in fingers blue-black with rime. Their tongues protrude through lips cracked like winter bark, blackened with frost that should not exist in heated compartments. Each stylus scratches identical diagrams across parchment and vellum. Hexagrams nested within nonagons, geometric progressions repeating with mechanical precision. The patterns suggest purpose beyond decorative scripture, each iteration adding subtle variations as if translating a signal that changes frequency while maintaining core structure. One scribe draws attention through peripheral horror that makes my augmetic eye stutter. His fingers have fused into a quill fan of bone and sinew, calcified digits branching into writing implements that scratch parchment with sounds of fingernails on coffin wood. Ink flows through hollow bones instead of veins, his transformed hand writing scripture in languages predating human contact with stars. The text appears and disappears like tide marks on digital shores, leaving ghost impressions that burn when read aloud. Environmental dread intensifies through absence rather than presence. Frost halos form around lumen sensors, despite reactor heat flooding the compartment. Ice crystals growing in perfect geometric formations, suggesting snowflakes designed by mathematical intelligence. The scent of brine permeates ozone-thick air where no moisture should exist. Salt spray from oceans that have never touched this vessel's hull, carried on winds that blow through sealed chambers. "Interrogator!" Flag Captain Hallis materializes beside me, her voice cracking through Vox speakers before she activates transmission. Her report arrives 9 seconds ahead of her words. 3 more armsmen misfiled into maintenance. Locator runes show positions inside sealed bulkheads, coordinates suggesting they occupy spaces between spaces. The paradox prints across data slates in regulation format, as if compliance with forms could normalize impossibility. Small rules shift like sand beneath tide, orders echo from command relays, seconds before they are given, crew members reflexively obeying pre-echoes with mechanical precision. A rating adjusts atmospheric controls in response to commands not yet issued, movements synchronized with phantom instructions. I observe another salute, an empty corridor, only for Hallis's voice to emanate from nearby Vox Grill, issuing the exact command the rating had acknowledged. "Show me maintenance logs." My request triggers immediate compliance, data slates materializing in hands that moved before conscious decision. The armsman's disappearance follows geometric progression. First 1, then 2, now 3. Positions plotting coordinates, forming vertices of expanding triangle. Their locator runes pulse inside sealed bulkheads where human bodies cannot exist, yet biosignatures register normal cardiac rhythm. Comms. Command frequency. Detecting pre-transmission echoes. Orders issued 9.3 seconds before vocal authorization. Crew compliance rate 100%. Explanation unknown. Temperature readings fluctuate in rhythm with my heartbeat, atmospheric processes cycling between normal parameters, and impossible cold that crystallizes breath in silver clouds. Testing the phenomenon with scientific precision, I speak Admiral Cord's name deliberately. Void shield capacitors spike, and compartment temperature drops exactly 2 degrees. The effect accumulates. First utterance drops temperature to -22 degrees Celsius, second to -24 degrees Celsius, third to -26 degrees Celsius, as if his name carries thermal mass that bleeds heat from reality's fabric. A servo skull approaches with mechanical reverence, optical lens dilating to focus on my inquisitorial rosette. Its vox grill crackles with static resolving into whispered Gothic. "The keel remembers blood, interrogator." The Admiral bleeds truth into iron bones. The transmission carries no authorization codes, yet behavioral patterns suggest direct command input from ship's machine spirit. The bridge vox system clears with crystalline clarity, static resolving into perfect acoustic conditions that make silence ring like cathedral bells. Admiral Cord's voice emerges warm and paternal, doubled by subharmonic frequencies that make my teeth itch and servoskulls orient with mechanical attention. "Interrogator Dryle, please walk with me where the ship speaks truth. The strategium awaits your presence." His words carry weight beyond sound, gravitational pull that makes deck plates vibrate in harmonic resonance with Geller field frequencies. The invitation extends through dimensions I cannot name, reaching into spaces between spaces where missing armsmen stand guard over secrets written in frost and iron. My chronometer stutters, losing 39 seconds in mechanical hiccup, suggesting time itself bends around his voice. Blast doors dilate in sequence, like breathing gills, each aperture opening with wet sounds of flesh parting rather than metal retracting. The passages beyond stretch longer than blueprints should allow, corridors lined with devotional banners hanging motionless, despite air currents strong enough to crystallize breath. The Admiral's presence grows stronger with each step, gravitational field that makes incense smoke curl into geometric patterns, hurting to observe directly, while something vast and patient waits to speak truth that will change everything. Compulsion, born from a mingling of duty and dread, turned my boots from the strategium's beckoning gills to the astropathic sanctum, a deviation that felt less like a choice than an instinctual response to the oath of severance's shifting gravity. The approach was a descent, the corridors subtly misaligned, their angles wrong in a way you only notice when your balance betrays you. Humidity, anathema to a void-locked vessel, pressed against my skin with a clammy insistence, carrying the copper tang of blood and the sharp ozone of overdriven circuits. The floor-sweated rivulets that traced deliberate, 9-pointed paths toward drain grates, splitting and merging as if guided by a logic beyond engineering or faith. Whenever I tried to track a pattern, the lines rearranged themselves in the periphery, only resolving into starbursts when my focus slipped away. Gravity's pull seemed to flow sideways, drawn toward ritual geometry etched into the floor, lines not present on any sanctioned schematic. Within the choir vault, the air was thick and metallic, heavy enough to slow each breath. The banners, once vibrant with the Emperor's triumphs, hung limp, their colors faded, as if the light itself struggled to persist. Each step brought a symphony of sensory contradictions, warmth and chill, pressure and void, all overlaid by the copper salt scent of something ancient and patient. The 7-knock pattern, so faint elsewhere, now thrummed through my boots and into my marrow. Each impact followed by a ghostly 8th, and then a hesitant, tardy 9th, like a sequence unwilling to end. Choir Mistress Mira Isola knelt at the central plinth, skull tattoos shining with neural oil, cables braided into her flesh like a living rosary. Her eyes, augmetic and organic both, reflected the light in fractal patterns. As I drew near, she rose, voice a measured chord. Interrogator. We have a silence that is too loud. The warp has become a white blank that moves when the Admiral speaks. Her composure was ironclad, but her words trembled in the air, as if each syllable carried weight beyond meaning. Around us, the astropathic choir swayed in their suspension harnesses, their mouths shaping litanies against a pressure that pressed back. I asked for demonstration. Isola signaled, and the choir began the litany of true bearing. The hymn developed holes as if moth-bitten. Syllables vanished in midair, then struck the deck seconds later as audible impacts, small sharp pops like beads on stone. Those fallen words rolled to join the sweating rivulets, vanishing into 9-pointed grates as if the floor itself was hungry for speech. Each failed note seemed to thicken the silence, a pressure that distorted the air and left my pulse out of rhythm. One astropath keened softly. From beneath her ritual bandage, her third eye wept crystalline tears that solidified into frost along her cheek, each flake a tiny hexagram. The medici attending her replaced gauze that crunched with ice, and the taste of salt and copper filled my mouth. It's not an assault, Isola said quietly, but an insistence. The quiet insists, her hand hovered near a reliquary, settling only by force of will. The relay coils embedded in the vault's arches ticked with mechanical urgency, red maintenance runes flashing into blue and back, then cascading into error cont. Mechanicus fragments, Binharic diagnostic, Delta 9 recursive, saturated the air, their logic loops unsolvable, cycling back upon themselves. Magos engineer Gaius 17's hymn seals fluttered on brass housings, but the error cont washed around them, unimpeded. A junior engine seer recited a prayer of unbinding. His auspex recorded green compliance, then appended a red codicil. Compliance predated request. "Your Vox logs," I demanded. Isola nodded toward a data well. Transmissions washed up like flotsam. Outbound messages returned before they were sent, some answering questions not yet asked. My own voice, unmistakable, issued an order. Keel inversion, at any cost. The biometric was mine, but the timestamp was impossibly early. My skin crawled. "I have not given that order," I said, and my voice filed the denial a second before I spoke it. Condensation bloomed on every brass rail and tile, beading into geometric patterns that shifted when attention turned. Viewed directly, they seemed random. In the periphery, they spun into 9-point rosettes, petals aligning with the invisible etchings in the floor before dissolving. I tested the pattern, looking away and back. Each time it advanced, as if the ship was learning me as much as I was learning it. "It is learning us," Mera whispered. I requested the navigator's warning. Isola's mouth tightened as she produced a parchment cylinder, sealed in translucent skin, from a Saint-Bone drawer. The scroll quivered in my palm, warmth gathering at its core, a pulse tapping along my glove. Ink bled and retracted at the edges, as if the parchment remembered it should not be read. "It will not open unless the key frequency is present," Mera explained. "We tried to match it, but the cipher recognizes absence." It wants his beat. The scroll flexed when I spoke Cord's name. A cold slither ran from it into my wrist. Telemetry scrolled across my auspex. Warp pressure gradient, choir volt, +9 millipascals per second rising, pulse periodicity 72 beats per minute, matching Fleet Admiral Cord's baseline. The numbers offered no comfort, only confirmation that the ship's heart beat to an alien rhythm. The 7 knock in my bones rippled to 9, then subsided, as if waiting for ceremony. "We tried to shout into it," Isola said. "We formed words into spears, and threw them at the blank, but it's as if we are children thrusting play knives into linen. When the Admiral speaks, it moves aside with decorum." Her inhale was measured, 1, 2, 3. Exhale, 9 short. "If you intend to read the navigator's warning, you'll need the Admiral's proximity." Beyond the vault, a bound astropath began the confessional of St. Kepler. The first line emerged true. The second froze in his throat as frost, then fell out and struck the grate, making every lumen stutter. For a heartbeat, the error cont paused, listening. I realized then how long it had been since I'd heard the engines thrum. Absence was the instrument, and the ship played us on it. I pocketed the living parchment. It writhed once against my sanctified pouch. The air thinned as I stepped into the corridor. The bridge vox cleared, crystalline and sincere. Admiral Cord's voice emerged, warm and paternal, doubled by a subharmonic that made my teeth ache. "Interrogator Dryle, walk with me where the ship speaks truth." His invitation reached not just my ears, but the soles of my boots. The deck plates hummed with something almost like contentment. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my marrow, that to read the navigator's warning, I would have to stand beside him on the command dais, where every chronometer counts backward for 13 breaths before resetting, and where the keel remembers out loud. Already I found myself walking toward the place where time goes polite and reverses to let the Admiral pass. The command sanctum rose like an altar of adamantine and adamant prayers, where tactical necessity had been transformed into devotional architecture. Candles guttered in iron cages despite no wind, their flames bending toward invisible presences. The deck bore the polish of 1,000 kneelings, worn smooth by generations of officers, making the same genuflection at the same threshold. Along the brass rails, chronometers counted backward for exactly 13 breaths, before resuming forward progression, as if time itself observed protocol when crossing this sacred space. The air felt consecrated, thick with the weight of authority that had transcended mere human command. Admiral Lyson Cord stood immaculate at the chamber's heart, uniform crisp as fresh parchment, every medal and braid catching lumens like captured starlight. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath that familiar bearing. When he turned, his eyes held a parallax of star fields that refused to match current stellar cartography. Constellations visible only from coordinates no human vessel had ever reached, depths suggesting he gazed through layers of reality, like looking down through clear water into impossible depths. "Little anchor," he said, voice carrying warmth that made frost patterns retreat from viewing ports. The childhood nickname struck like a physical blow. No naval dossier contained that information. No inquisitorial file recorded the pet name my grandmother had whispered during Terran winters 43 years past. His voice doubled itself with sub-bass frequencies, too regular for human vocal, chords, harmonics suggesting mechanical precision married to organic warmth that made servo skulls orient with mechanical reverence. My auspex stuttered, displaying fleet positions that showed escort vessels already arranged in perfect convoy protection formation. Coordinates they would not reach for another 71 hours. The image held for 3 heartbeats before snapping back to current positions like elastic released. Reality hiccuped, and I experienced micro-skipped seconds, where time lurched forward without transition, moments compressed into temporal gaps my chronometer refused to acknowledge, while still losing 39 seconds with each of Cord's transmissions. "The fleet remembers its future formations," Cord explained, gesturing toward the tactical display, with movements that left after-images in peripheral vision. His orders flowed through command circuits with crystalline precision, aligning picket ships into patterns that resembled scripture glyphs when viewed inverted. Destroyer Penitent Blade adjusted heading by 2 degrees, Cruiser Divine Mandate elevated position by 4,000 kilometers. The movements traced geometric devotions across void space, fleet formations becoming 3-dimensional prayer wheels spinning around invisible axes. "Remembered futures," he continued gently, as if explaining drill procedures to cadets. "The keel keeps what is asked of it, Interrogator. We blessed it to carry our dead, and it has learned to carry tomorrow as well." His augmetic vox chalice throat implant gleamed gold-veined against pale flesh, pulsing with rhythms that matched the ship's impossible heartbeat. Each pause in his speech drew cold deeper into the chamber, atmospheric processors cycling through parameters that should have triggered emergency protocols. The navigator's warning grew warm in my palm, parchment responding to Cord's proximity, like living tissue recognizing its master. "The scroll remembers its purpose," he observed with genuine pleasure. Navigator Var was thorough in his preparations. The sealed document pulsed against sanctified leather until I could feel individual letters shifting beneath ancient ciphers, warming through impossible gradients that spoke of proximity to something that should not exist. Ship temperature dropped whenever Cord paused mid-sentence, gravity fluctuating by measurable degrees in his immediate vicinity, as if space-time bent around concentrated authority. My boots found purchase on surfaces that tilted toward him like compass needles seeking magnetic north, while servo skulls arranged themselves in honor formation, responding to commands never given. "Will you bless the keel with me, Interrogator?" His invitation carried weight beyond words, authority wrapped in courtesy that made the chamber's very air vibrate with anticipation. "The ship has learned new prayers, and iron bones require proper consecration." The navigator's warning unlocked with wet sounds of flesh parting, parchment unfolding like skin beneath surgical precision. Words appeared in Navigator House Var's script, ink bleeding from nothing into visibility, as proximity triggered ciphers older than Imperial record. The text began with standard formal address before revealing truth that made my augmetic eye stutter in mechanical denial. Death certificate, signed and sealed by Fleet Medicare Primary, witnessed by 3 officers whose signatures I recognized. Admiral Lysan Cord, declared deceased during warp emergence. Cardiac cessation confirmed at 14:27 Terran Standard. Time stamped 41 hours prior to current chronometer reading. The document bore official seals, biometric confirmation, tissue samples preserved in stasis fields, cause of death listed as Imperium exposure, massive cerebral hemorrhage, soul displacement. Cord observed my reading with patient interest, head tilted like curious bird examining fascinating specimen. The sub-bass hum in his voice intensified, resonating through deck plates until the very adamantine sang in harmonic response. When I finished, he spoke with genuine regret that made Frost retreat from bulkheads, stars wheeling slowly in pupils that held depths no human eyes should contain. Do you accept my apology for being late to my own resurrection? His confession carried weight of absolute truth, wrapped in impossibility. The admiral who stood before me, warm, paternal, commanding, had died during warp emergence. Yet here he remained, speaking of remembered futures and teaching ships to pray, while somewhere in the vessel's depths his corpse maintained separate existence. Death proved more educational than anticipated. The keel taught me much during those missing hours, and now we have work to finish before the convoy arrives. The death certificate trembled in my hands like living skin, parchment remembering its purpose, even as reality folded around contradictions that should not exist, while the admiral, who was, and was, not waited for my answer, with the patience of something that had already seen how this conversation would end. Reeling from the impossible revelation of Admiral Cord's documented death, I retreated through corridors that stretched longer with each step, seeking sanctuary in the Mechanicus domain where logic might still govern reality's mechanics. The command sanctum's courteous gravity had become unbearable. That gentle apology for being late to his own resurrection, echoing in my skull like a bell tolling backwards through time. The engine cathedral promised harsher honesty, iron and heat instead of impossible warmth and parallax star fields that belonged to no human gaze. The Mechanicus sanctum rose like a forest of pistons and prayer wheels, where incense-choked heat pressed against void, cold in gradients that defied thermodynamic law. Ritual chimes ticked at hearing's edge, bronze bells marking time in 7-beat measures answered by 9, their rhythm a counterpoint to plasma conduits humming, litanies in binary cant. Steam hissed through blessed pipes in patterns suggesting breathing rather than mechanical function, while cogitator banks processed data with reverent precision that made servo skulls orient like mechanical congregants. Magos engineer Gaius 17 awaited beside the primary reactor shrine. Mechadendrites writhing in agitation, while optical lenses clicked through magnification cycles. His remaining human eye wept sacred oils when he spoke, voice carrying weight of confession that made incense smoke curl into geometric patterns, hurting to observe directly. Interrogator, place me under Auspec's oath, that I may confess without corruption of checksum. His request emerged in measured Binharic cant, translation overlays, struggling with concepts that bent language into impossible angles. I keyed the right, watching lumen strips flicker as truth protocols engaged, compelling honesty through sacred logic. After catastrophic warp shear during emergence, he began, Vox grill crackling with static that resolved into distant surf. Admiral Cord personally led the keel litany. He descended to the ship's deepest sanctums, where iron bones meet void space, bleeding into the machine altar to remember the ship, back together, from fragments scattered across Empyrean currents. His confession detailed the horror, with clinical precision. Hull breaches in 17 compartments, Geller field generators offline, machine spirit fragmenting into static scream. Admiral Cord had bled truth into iron bones until the Oath of Severance remembered its purpose, teaching the vessel prayers older than Imperial record. Since then, Geller harmonics have inverted, pressing inward rather than outward, and maintenance algorithms refuse execution unless the Admiral stands nearby. His pulse serves as authorization for protocols requiring omniscire blessing. Environmental anchors shifted between fever heat and impossible cold, my breath fogging despite temperature readings showing optimal conditions. Steam condensed on blessed brass fittings, droplets tracing 9-pointed patterns toward drain grates that should not exist in engine compartments designed for void operation. The air tasted of sacred oils and ozone, copper pennies and brine that had no place aboard void-locked vessels. A maintenance thrall approached with mechanical reverence, his movements synchronized with the distant 7-knock pattern. As I watched, his augmetic tongue split into silvered strands that braided themselves into prayer rope, organic tissue resolving into metallic fibers that wove liturgical knots with surgical precision. Each strand clicked against its neighbors, producing sounds like rosary beads, counting prayers in languages predating human contact with stars. He smiled without permission, eyes rolled to whites as the rope tightened and rang like tiny bells. Beneath sacred red paint on bulkhead shrines, Binharic graffiti bled through in characters that hurt to read. Keel remembers fed blood, repeated in 17 different dialects of machine cant. The text appeared and disappeared like tide marks on digital shores, letters scratched by desperate stylus, then sealed over by pious hands, refusing to stay buried. An empty reliquary slot bore a brass nameplate reading simply KORD, positioned at the shrine's heart, where sacred artifacts should rest. The cavity was human-sized, lined with preservation fields and neural interface cables, suggesting purpose beyond mere storage. The Admiral's essence had become component of the ship's new, monstrous machine spirit. "The ship is not merely remembering, Interrogator," Gaius 17 whispered, mechadendrites trembling with barely controlled anxiety. "It is reenacting. The Geller fields perform their new function, containing the echo, allowing the pattern to form." Hull pressure readings pulsed in heartbeat patterns across cogitator screens, each systolic spike accompanied by gravitational fluctuations that made deck plates vibrate with harmonic resonance. Static resolved into the familiar 7-knock pattern, then 9, then silence, pregnant with anticipation that made servo skulls arrange themselves in honor formation. Red banners snapped in heatless gales that carried scents of brine and machine oil, devotional flags responding to winds that should not exist in sealed compartments. Emergency klaxons chimed with crystalline clarity, notes forming harmonic progressions, suggesting ecclesiastical rather than military origin, transforming alarm into liturgy that shook dust from saints' niches. Geller pressure readings spiked catastrophically, containment fields straining against something vast and patient, pressing inward rather than outward. A sealed lower deck segment, keel-access sanctum, unlocked autonomously, blast doors dilating with wet sounds of flesh parting rather than metal retracting. Emergency lighting flickered in rhythm with heartbeat patterns, red lumens casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. From the depths below, where Admiral Cord had bled truth into iron altars, a child's voice whispered over Vox systems, with clarity that made frost patterns crawl across viewing ports. On the 9th toll, grandfather comes home. Duty compelled me toward the medici deck, where death wore sterile masks, and bodies told stories no living tongue should speak. Sergeant Cade assembled his armsman squad with practiced efficiency that cut through the ship's deepening malaise, boots echoing against deck plates that vibrated with the oath of Severance's impossible heartbeat. The infirmary's threshold exhaled antiseptic breath mixed with the metallic tang of iron-cold coins, scents that should not coexist in spaces designed for healing, yet now spoke only of transformation beyond medical understanding. "Perimeter, cardinal arcs, safety's on," I ordered, and Cade repeated with drill-yard precision that steadied hands against encroaching dread. Laser-guns clicked through safety protocols that rang like prayer beads in the silence, each man checking his weapon's machine spirit with whispered litanies while establishing triage zones according to regulations that seemed quaint against the horror arrayed on medici slabs. Military realism intruded upon surreal nightmare, firing arcs covered, thermal masking negative, perimeter secured against threats that defied tactical doctrine. The bodies displayed stigmata of impossible geometry that made my augmetic eye stutter in mechanical denial. Capillaries had resolved into star chart patterns beneath translucent skin, mapping constellations that belonged to no human-surveyed sector, yet matched the fleet formation coordinates I had observed on the bridge hololith. Ribs had grown extra bars, forming runic structures beneath flesh, bone alphabet spelling words in languages predating Imperial Gothic. One rating's chest cavity pulsed with bioluminescent light that traced hexagrams nested within nonagons, the same patterns the scriptorium servitors had scratched before freezing solid at their desks. A comatose rating lay strapped to a medici slab, lips moving in steady rhythm as he counted to 9 repeatedly. His voice carried through the ward with mechanical precision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 9th count emerged as silence, yet every lumen lamp fluttered in perfect sequence, as if responding to unheard words that made reality hiccup forward through temporal gaps. The pattern repeated without variation, each silent 9th beat accompanied by gravitational fluctuations that made medical instruments swing on their chains like sensors in cathedral winds. Confessor Bran Otho knelt beside the worst cases, administering sealing litanies with voice that cracked under supernatural strain. His words mispronounced themselves in synchronization with hydrostatic pump cycles, sacred syllables warping into Binharic cant before snapping back to Gothic. Each blessing carried harmonics that made the wounded smile without permission, their faces relaxing into expressions of contentment despite injuries that should have kept them screaming in agony. "Confessor, report on spiritual contamination levels." My words carried inquisitorial authority, while dread built beneath clinical facade. Otho's augmetic throat speaker crackled with static resolving into ocean sounds, waves lapping shores that should not exist in void-locked chambers, where no moisture had ever touched blessed bulkheads. A Medici Auspex detected heartbeat signatures, matching ship pressure pulses exactly. 23 cardiac rhythms synchronized with the vessel's impossible pulse. Each patient's heartbeat in perfect time, with hull pressure fluctuations, their bodies serving as components in the expanding machine spirit that had learned to remember futures and resurrect the dead through iron prayers written in blood. Medical records confirmed the impossible truth that made my hands tremble despite inquisitorial training. Admiral Lyson Cord declared deceased during warp emergence, cardiac cessation recorded for exactly 13 minutes before spontaneous resumption when keel bells tolled 9 times. His death certificate bore official seals, biometric confirmation, tissue samples preserved in stasis fields. Yet somewhere above us, his warm voice issued orders with paternal authority that made Frost retreat from bulkheads. Hidden within a cadaver's augmetic implant, a Navigator House VAR cipher waited like patient spider. The encrypted message required specialized tools to extract, revealing warnings written in script that burned when read aloud. Len's Admiral wears flesh like ceremonial robes. Ship spirit cultured for remembrance, not guidance. Beware the 9th toll. It calls the grandfather home. The dead navigator's final plea confirmed terrifying truth. Admiral Cord had become something that looked through human eyes at realities no mortal should perceive. Environmental horror manifested through absence rather than presence. Frost flowers crawled up ward walls in exact diagrams the scriptorium servitors had scratched, ice crystals growing in hexagonal patterns that hurt to observe directly, yet compelled attention like gravitational pull. Each formation suggested purpose beyond decorative sculpture, geometric progressions that made servo skulls orient with mechanical reverence toward patterns that folded space into configurations reality was never meant to accommodate. Void-cold breeze rolled through sealed compartments, despite atmospheric readings showing optimal pressure, carrying scents of brine and machine oil from depths no Imperial vessel should contain. The wind whispered in languages predating human contact with stars, syllables that made medical instruments chime like distant bells, counting time in measures that hurt to follow, while frost patterns crawled across viewing ports in geometric recursions. Admiral Cord's voice emerged from Vox speakers with crystalline clarity, warm and paternal, yet carrying subharmonics that bypassed conscious thought. All hands to general quarters for rehearsal. The Emperor protects, and the keel remembers. No drill was scheduled, no threat detected, yet crew members throughout the ship began moving with mechanical precision toward battle stations they had never been assigned. The invitation carried harmonics that reached directly into muscle memory, making crew members smile without knowing why. Their faces relaxed into identical expressions of contentment as they abandoned current duties to attend rehearsals for ceremonies they could not name. Sergeant Cade's thumb drifted toward his lasgun selector, not to fire, but to safe, unconscious acceptance of authority that should not exist. I touched his pauldron, voice flat as decree. Hold stations. This rehearsal is unsanctioned. Yet even as I spoke, I felt my own lips curve upward in response to frequencies that made teeth itch and reality bend around impossible commands issued by the admiral who had died, and learned to remember himself back into existence through iron prayers and blood sacrifice to keels that had grown hungry for human devotion. Navigator Primus Far's sanctum required forced entry. Blast doors sealed with House 4 cipher locks that recognized only genetic markers now cooling in morgue compartments. I overrode security with inquisitorial codes, while plasma cutters traced consecrated patterns through adamantine, each spark blessing the breach with sanctified violence. The chamber beyond exhaled saline wet air, impossible aboard void-locked vessels, humidity thick enough to coat my tongue with brine from oceans that had never touched this ship's hull. Walls bore desiccated starfish relics arranged in navigation patterns, suggesting charts drawn by alien minds, their calcified arms pointing toward coordinates existing in dimensions beyond standard geometry. Astrolabes clicked out of temporal phase, brass mechanisms tracking stellar movements that preceded current reality by minutes, their calculations arriving at conclusions before observations could confirm them. Each instrument hummed with mechanical anticipation, as if the navigator's tools had learned to see around corners in space-time itself. Navigator Primus Indri Var knelt before his divination altar, blindfold blood-crusted, where his third eye had wept crystalline tears that shattered like glass on blessed marble. His remaining human eyes reflected star fields, belonging to no surveyed sector, pupils dilated beyond medical possibility, yet focused with terrible clarity on truths that burned to perceive directly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession that made astrolabes cease their clicking in mechanical reverence. Interrogator, during warp shear, something vast and patient noticed Admiral Cord's unwavering doctrine. His words emerged in measured Gothic seeded with navigator cant, each syllable carefully chosen to avoid naming blasphemies that might respond to direct address. It did not break him. It wore him like a lens, using his authority to focus intention into reality's fabric. The ship now remembers forwards, calculating futures with the same precision it once applied to stellar navigation. "Show me your charts," I commanded, stepping closer to the oculus altar. The starfield within was wrong. Depth shivered, lanes bent into loops and folded back, routes braided into ninefold recursions. Fleet escort patterns, visible only through Var's third eye sight, sketched a sector-sized sigil in void space using Imperial vessels as stylus points across star chart canvas. Each ship's position formed vertices of expanding geometric progression, coordinates aligning into patterns that hurt to observe, yet compelled attention, like gravitational pull toward event horizons. "The Pilgrim Convoy's approach provides the final brushstroke," Var continued, blindfold weeping fresh blood, as he traced patterns only navigator sight could perceive. 17,000 souls carrying sacred relics. Their faith serves as ink for signatures written across reality's margins, in coordinates that spell devotion older than Imperial record. The critical revelation struck like a physical blow. The inverted Geller field didn't protect from warp intrusion, but caged an echoing presence inside, preventing dispersal before sigil completion. Admiral Cord's subharmonic voice carried instructions to machinery through frequencies that bypassed conscious thought, his heart beating in perfect metronome rhythm that served as temporal anchor for patterns stretching across light years of void space. What exactly is this presence? My voice carried inquisitorial authority, while dread built beneath clinical facade. Var's response emerged in whispers that made servo skulls orient with mechanical attention. "The wake," he rasped, voice barely audible above clicking astrolabes. It existed before the Emperor, before the stars. It remembers everything that was, and desires to remember everything that will be. Cord's faith, his absolute adherence to doctrine, made him a perfect lens, a focus for its will. It speaks canticles of unbinding in languages predating human contact with stars, teaching machinery prayers that dissolve barriers between real space and Empyrean depths. Religious vocabulary dominated his confession as third eye blood traced geometric patterns on marble altar. Litanies of sealing proved ineffective against something that incorporated resistance into expanding ritual architecture. The ninefold mysteries Secret's navigator houses had guarded since the dark age of technology were being perverted into cosmic blasphemy written in fleet formations across star charts. The moral branch crystallized with terrible clarity. A tempter-est of Admiral Cord risking premature sigil completion that might scatter the presence across real space or allow the ritual to proceed while studying its nature for Ordo Hereticus archives. Each choice carried consequences stretching beyond single sectors, implications for Imperial doctrine governing humanity's relationship with warp space and entities dwelling within Empyrean depths. The presence offers bargains, Var confessed. Navigator sight focused on futures I could not perceive. Knowledge, stellar charts mapping routes through warp storms that have claimed thousands of vessels, coordinates for shrine worlds lost during the Age of Strife. The price is simple. Acknowledgement, recognition, a place in Imperial liturgy beside the Emperor's light. Sector map overlays showed convoy estimated arrival slipping earlier by minutes, temporal displacement accelerating as the sigil neared completion. The pilgrim ships approached through warp space with devotional precision, their navigator houses unknowingly participating in ceremony that would transform 17,000 faithful into components of expanding blasphemy. 7 knocks cascaded through hull structure, like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Percussion transmitted through adamantine ribs with mechanical precision. The familiar pattern built to crescendo, before adding 2 deeper tolls that made bulkheads vibrate with harmonic resonance. 9 beats total that rang like cathedral bells, calling faithful to ceremonies older than Imperial record. Bulkheads reconfigured with wet sounds of flesh parting rather than metal retracting. Doors aligning into straight vista toward command throne like cathedral nave. The corridor stretched impossibly long, perspective warping around gravitational fields that bent space-time toward the Admiral's presence. Devotional banners hung motionless despite air currents, their sacred imagery shifting when observed peripherally into patterns suggesting worship of entities unnamed in Imperial doctrine. Admiral Cord's voice emerged from Vox speakers with crystalline clarity, speaking in present tense and future perfect simultaneously. "Come, Cassian. The keel has been waiting for your arrival since before you knew to make the journey." His invitation carried harmonics that reached directly into muscle memory, bypassing conscious decision, while reality folded around authority that existed in multiple temporal states at once. The Admiral who was and would be calling me toward meetings that had already occurred in futures where the 9th toll had summoned something ancient home to roost in iron bones that remembered how to pray. The decision crystallized with inquisitorial finality that cut through the ship's deepening malaise like a blade through silk. I activated arrest protocols under Hereticus authority, my voice carrying weight that made servo skulls orient with mechanical attention. All armsman squads, Code Vermilion. Target designation, Fleet Admiral Lisan Cord. Arrest under suspicion of heretical possession. The Emperor protects. Sergeant Cade's response came crisp, despite subharmonic interference saturating Vox channels. Understood, Interrogator. Squads Alpha through Delta, deploying boarding formation. His men moved with practiced efficiency that imposed order upon chaos, threatening to consume rational thought. Approach vectors mapped like ship assault against internal architecture, laser-guns checked and blessed, ammunition consecrated with oils that gleamed silver in impossible light. Tactical formations established with military precision, while the oath of severance prepared to defend itself through means no Imperial doctrine had anticipated. The vessel fought back with geometry that defied architectural possibility. Corridors lengthened as we advanced, stretching beyond blueprint specifications, while maintaining proper proportions, suggesting infinite regression rather than spatial distortion. Each step forward required two to maintain position, distance becoming elastic under gravitational fields that bent space-time around Admiral Cord's presence. Stairwells looped impossibly, ascending steps returning us to identical landings despite consistent artificial gravity that made compass needles spin like prayer wheels, seeking magnetic north that existed in multiple directions simultaneously. Doors outnumbered available hinges, apertures breeding across bulkheads, like mouths opening in silent devotion. Each threshold led to chambers that should not exist within hull displacement, yet contained atmosphere and pressure readings that flickered between normal and impossible parameters. The ship's architecture expanded beyond physical constraints, reality bending to accommodate interior space that grew with each heartbeat, pulsing through adamantine ribs. Combat erupted with clinical precision, married to supernatural chaos that made tactical doctrine seem quaint against horror arrayed before us. Some crew members dropped weapons and knelt in perfect genuflection, faces relaxing into identical expressions of contentment while their eyes reflected star fields belonging to no human-surveyed sector. Others fired with liturgical calm, laser guns discharging in rhythm with the distant 7-knock pattern, while their lips moved in prayers that made muzzle-flash strobes cast rune shadows against bulkhead saints. Subharmonic vox orders overrode conscious will, Admiral Cord's doubled voice lacing commands directly into muscle memory that bypassed rational thought entirely. Stand down, faithful servants. The Emperor's work continues through willing vessels. His words carried gravitational pull that made armsmen pause mid-trigger squeeze, their faces cycling through confusion before settling into mechanical obedience that made Sergeant Cade bark orders with increased urgency. Confessor Bran Otho countered with canticles of unbinding, voice cracking under supernatural strain as he shouted litanies older than Imperial record. His augmetic throat speaker glowed white-hot as sacred words burned through harmonics that had wrapped around minds like silk chains. Some enchantment fractured with sounds like glass breaking underwater, leaving crew members weeping bloody tears while their augmetic implants sparked with feedback that made them stumble back into independent thought. Military vocabulary dominated the chaos, while reality warped around impossible combat. Bolt rounds scraped bone from bulkhead saints, their explosive tips detonating against adamantine, with percussion that rang like bells, calling faithful to ceremonies unnamed in Imperial doctrine. Muzzle flash illuminated devotional banners, shifting into patterns that hurt to observe directly, sacred imagery warping into geometric blasphemies that made servo skulls rotate with mechanical reverence rather than programmed function. Admiral Cord stood in the storm's eye, immaculate uniform untouched by violence swirling around his position like water parting around stone. When bolt rounds struck his chest, they passed through with wet chorus like whale song before, impacting seconds later against bulkheads behind him, leaving holes that wept condensation in 9-pointed patterns. He smiled with genuine warmth that made Frost retreat from viewing ports, speaking words that carried weight beyond sound. "Thank you, Cassian, for accelerating the remembering. The keel required catalyst, and your resistance provides perfect timing." Environmental chaos escalated beyond tactical doctrine as archers climbed impossibly high, their peaks vanishing into shadows, suggesting cathedral vaulting rather than ship architecture. Cherub servitors abandoned maintenance duties to rotate in honor formation, mechanical eyes tracking combat with expressions of anticipation that made their optical lenses glow like votive candles arranged for ceremonies older than Imperial record. Body horror escalated through transformation, rather than violence that made combat itself become prayer, performed for entities dwelling in Empyrean depths, crew members' uniforms fused with deck plating, fabric weaving into metal, until flesh and steel became indistinguishable components of expanding blasphemy. Their movements synchronized into ritual patterns, combat actions resolving into ceremonial gestures, while armsmen fired in sequences that spelled devotional words across space, muzzle flashes forming geometric progressions that made reality hiccup forward through temporal gaps. A rating's boots sealed into grating with sounds of wax cooling, his throat opening like speaking slot to recite the litany of safe transit in voice older than lungs, while letters climbed his fingernails like living scripture seeking flesh to inhabit. Another's limbs elongated at impossible angles, bones conforming to architectural patterns etched into bulkheads by hands that had learned new ways to pray. The bridge metamorphosed into cathedral architecture that transformed tactical necessity into devotional space where warfare became worship. Blast doors sealed with sounds like chains dropped into deep water, each closure accompanied by wet percussion that made the hull sing hymns in languages predating human contact with stars. Tactical stations rose into altar configurations, while viewing ports stretched into stained glass windows, depicting saints whose faces shifted when observed peripherally into expressions of hunger rather than benediction. The oath of severance had become a shrine, its adamantine bones singing prayers that reached through dimensions unnamed in Imperial doctrine. We, Inquisitor and crew alike, had become the final offering required for rituals written in blood and iron, components in ceremonies that would summon something ancient home to roost in hull plates that remembered how to count to 9 and wait for grandfathers to come calling through doors that opened onto depths no human architect had ever designed. Separated from half my team by bulkheads that bred new apertures with each heartbeat pulsing through adamantine bones, I tracked Admiral Cord through reconfigured arteries that stretched beyond blueprint specifications. The oath of severance had become organism rather than vessel, its corridors breathing with tidal rhythm, while emergency lighting flickered in 9-beat patterns that made servo skulls orient with mechanical reverence toward gravitational centers existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sensory anchors alternated with mechanical precision that defied atmospheric regulation. Air warmed to fever heat before plunging into void cold that crystallized breath in silver clouds, temperature gradients cycling as if controlled by intelligence that had learned new ways to count beyond human mathematics. Every 9th step vibrated deck plates as if something vast turned in sleep beneath the keel, percussion transmitted through iron ribs with sounds like whale song echoing through oceanic depths that should not exist aboard void-locked vessels. Bells tolled with crystalline clarity. 1, pause. 2, pause, each note hanging in air thick enough to taste before building toward crescendo that made reality hiccup forward through temporal gaps. When 9 bells crashed together in harmonic convergence, my chronometer stuttered through seconds I had never experienced, yet somehow remembered living, while the ship counted moments that existed in futures where Admiral Cord had already won religious vocabulary hummed through consciousness as I whispered counter-litanies learned in Schola Progenium halls that seemed impossibly distant from this shrine the ship had become. Each blessing required thumb blood scraped against sanctified blade, crimson droplets marking bulkhead seals with wards older than Imperial record, while my voice carried prayers that made hull plates sing hymns in response, harmonics building until adamantine became choir-singing devotions in languages predating human contact with stars. Lumen filaments knotted themselves into triangular patterns at each junction, electrical conduits weaving geometric configurations that hummed harmonically with Admiral Cord's subharmonic frequency. The ship's nervous system was learning new prayers, power distribution becoming liturgy, while emergency lighting spelled devotional words across corridor walls in Morse code that made my augmetic eye stutter in mechanical denial of patterns suggesting intelligence dwelling within copper veins. A shrine locker sealed with House Var cipher locks contained revelation that made my hands tremble despite inquisitorial training. Inside, a child's rosary hung with 9 rusted command tags bearing names I recognized. The missing armsmen, reduced to devotional objects worn smooth by fingers that had learned to count beyond human comprehension. Each tag bore biometric traces, soul prints compressed into metal that wept condensation in 9-pointed patterns, while whispering names in voices belonging to men who had vanished into sealed bulkheads, yet somehow continued serving. Environmental wrongness manifested through violations of physical law that made navigation itself become prayer performed for entities dwelling in Empyrean depths. Coriolis winds blew through sealed corridors, despite atmospheric readings showing optimal pressure, carrying scents of brine and machine oil from oceans that had never touched this vessel's hull. Condensation flowed uphill against gravity's pull, droplets tracing geometric patterns toward drain grates that should not exist in compartments designed for void operation. Pressure gradients guided me through passages that stretched with each step, drawing me deeper toward the keel where ship structure was thickest and most sacred. Devotional alcoves lined the route, their saints' faces shifting when observed peripherally into expressions of hunger rather than benediction, while servo skulls arranged themselves in honor formation, responding to commands never given by human voices. My auspex detected gravitational anomalies suggesting mass displacement beyond hull specifications, the ship growing heavier with each heartbeat as something vast settled into iron bones that had learned to remember futures through prayers written in blood. The reactor's hum changed pitch, power flowing toward the keel in patterns suggesting ritual architecture rather than mechanical necessity. The final approach descended through passages lined with phosphorescent algae that should not exist aboard void-locked vessels, their bioluminescent glow pulsing in rhythm with the ship's impossible heartbeat. Each step brought scents of salt spray and copper pennies mixing into atmospheric cocktail that tasted of depths no Imperial architect had ever designed, while condensation traced 9-pointed patterns on bulkheads that wept tears of frost despite reactor heat flooding the compartments. The final hatch to keel access sanctum slid open autonomously, with wet sounds of flesh parting rather than metal retracting, blast doors dilating like breathing gills, while emergency lighting flickered in sequences that spelled devotional words across adamantine walls. The aperture exhaled winter breath, carrying harmonics older than Imperial record, frequencies that made teeth ache, and reality bend around authority, existing in multiple temporal states. From darkness below, where Admiral Cord had bled truth into iron altars, came water sounds impossible aboard void ships. Slow, shoreless tide lapping against something that breathed with rhythm, matching the vessel's pulse, while whispers in languages predating human spaceflight promised truths that would transform everything into components of expanding blasphemy, written across star charts bleeding geometry into reality's margins. The keel sanctum opened like a wound in reality's flesh, a cavern rimed with salt crystals that gleamed with phosphorescent light, pulsing in rhythm with the ship's impossible heartbeat. Every surface slicked with oil that refused to bead, despite surface tension laws, instead flowing in, geometric patterns toward drain grates carved with symbols that hurt to observe directly. The air pressed thick and humid despite void cold readings scrolling across my auspex, oppressive heat that made sweat crystallize before it could fall, while my breath fogged in silver clouds that hung motionless in recycled atmosphere. Every handrail had been transformed into devotional architecture, metal wrapped with rosary chains, whose bone beads clicked against each other, with sounds like teeth chattering in winter graves. Each bead marked prayers in languages predating Imperial Gothic, their surfaces worn smooth by fingers that had learned to count beyond human comprehension, while servo skulls, oriented with mechanical reverence toward gravitational centers, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The ritual engine dominated the chamber's heart, bone lattice and copper veins welded into spinal configuration, constructed from missing crew's calcified remains. Armsmen who had vanished into sealed bulkheads now formed architectural framework, their skeletons singing hymns in harmonics that made adamantine resonate like cathedral bells. Ribcages opened like cathedral doors, housed crystalline matrices that pulsed with bioluminescent light, while skulls served as data ports, cranial cavities containing neural interfaces that writhed like living cables seeking flesh to inhabit. Evidence of Admiral Cord's bleeding rituals stained every copper surface, dried black sanguine forming geometric patterns suggesting devotional calligraphy, written in languages older than human contact with stars. Each sacrifice had deepened the Geller field inversion, containment pressure increasing as something vast settled into iron bones that had learned to remember futures through prayers written in blood and neural tissue transformed into living devotional architecture. Magos engineer Gaius 17 keened ghost binary as his mechadendrites traced copper veins pulsing with Empyrean energy, translation overlays struggling with concepts that bent language into impossible angles. "Mnemonic containment node," he whispered, Vox grill crackling with static that resolved into ocean sounds. Tuned to cardiac rhythm, the Admiral's heartbeat serves as authorization key. It cages echoes until sigil completion, remembering everything, past, present, futures that crystallize through repetition. The moral decision crystallized with terrible clarity. Sever the bloodlines connecting Admiral to engine-risking catastrophic surge that might scatter the presence across real space, or wait for complete manifestation while documenting everything for Ordo Hereticus archives. Each choice carried consequences stretching beyond single sectors, implications for humanity's relationship with entities dwelling in Empyrean depths, where ancient things counted to 9 and waited patiently for recognition. Confessor Bran Otho moved through the chamber with liturgical precision, covering calcified remains, with blessed stole while whispering the catechism of names, prayers that assigned identity to bones that had forgotten their original owners. His augmetic throat speaker glowed white-hot, as sacred words burned through harmonics, saturating the air, each blessing accompanied by sparks that made neural matrices flicker with residual consciousness trapped within crystalline prisons. "Perimeter established, firing arcs covered," Sergeant Cade reported with drill-yard efficiency that imposed order upon chaos, threatening to consume rational thought entirely. His remaining armsmen moved with tactical precision, despite geometry that defied architectural possibility. Melter charges primed against targets that might not exist in standard three-dimensional space. Military realism persisted as anchor against supernatural horror. Weapons checked, ammunition blessed, fields of fire maintained, even when reality bent around impossible authority. Environmental micro-horror manifested through sensory contradictions that made the chamber itself become a component of expanding ritual. Tide sounds rose with brine breath that chilled sweat despite oppressive heat, salt spray from oceans that had never touched this vessel's hulls, carried on winds blowing through sealed compartments. Each wave crash echoed through hull structure with percussion that made bones vibrate in harmonic resonance with frequencies older than Imperial record. The deep current that flowed beneath reality's fabric made itself known through gravitational fluctuations that bent space-time around concentrated authority, existing in multiple temporal states. Void song harmonics saturated the air with frequencies that bypassed conscious thought, reaching directly into muscle memory, while condensation crawled uphill against gravity's pull, droplets tracing 9-pointed recursions toward drain grates that whispered names in voices belonging to men who had become components of expanding blasphemy. A maintenance thrall's spine had been opened like sacred text, vertebrae serving as conduits carrying Empyrean energy, while his skull housed crystal matrices that beat in perfect synchronization with the ship's pulse. Eye sockets contained neural interfaces connecting organic consciousness to the engine's bone lattice architecture, their surfaces etched with inverted catechisms that made servo skulls rotate in honor formation, responding to commands never given by human voices. Admiral Cord's voice emanated from the hull itself rather than vox systems, words conducted through iron bones that had learned to speak in harmonics older than human spaceflight. The command throne descended like elevator of living ribs, organic architecture that breathed with tidal rhythm, while neural interfaces extended like welcoming serpents. Bone and copper fused into seat that pulsed wet with someone else's heartbeat, crystalline matrices glowing with bioluminescent promise of knowledge spanning eons of accumulated memory. Seat. Yourself, Cassian. The Admiral's doubled voice carried warmth that made frost retreat from bulkheads, while subharmonics reached directly into muscle memory. I will let the convoy pass in peace. Be my lens. End the forgetting that has plagued humanity since first contact with warp space. The throne waited with patient hunger, offering transformation that would make me component of expanding blasphemy, while 17,000 pilgrims approached carrying sacred relics that would complete rituals written in coordinates, bleeding geometry into reality's margins, where something ancient had been counting. To 9 for longer than stars had burned, waiting for grandfathers to come home through doors that opened onto depths no human architect had ever designed. I ascended through architecture that breathed with tidal rhythm toward the throne chamber. An oculus punched through adamantine, where impossible void stared back with malevolent intelligence. Each step up the spiral stairway carried scents of brine and machine oil, while handrails wrapped in rosary chains clicked with sounds like teeth chattering in winter graves. The chamber itself rose like a cathedral pulpit elevated above the keel, its walls curving into viewing ports that showed stars smearing like ink dragged by invisible fingers across cosmic parchment. Admiral Lisan Cord waited beside the throne, with sleeves rolled to elbows, revealing veins mapped like star charts, pulsing with bioluminescent fluid beneath translucent skin. Each pulse synchronized with the ship's impossible heartbeat, while constellations traced beneath flesh that remembered being human, yet had learned to serve as lens for entities dwelling in Empyrean depths. His augmetic vox chalice throat implant gleamed gold-veined against pale flesh, neural interfaces writhing like living cables seeking connection to something vast and patient. Rules thinned to translucence as I crossed the threshold. Stars outside viewing ports buckled like black ocean surface, disturbed by something rising from depths between dimensions, stellar cartography, becoming abstract art while time crinkled at word edges. Reality hiccuped through temporal gaps where syllables arrived before thoughts could form them into coherent speech, making servo skulls orient with mechanical reverence toward authority, transcending mere human command. Admiral Cord's mouth moved with familiar warmth, yet a second voice spoke from deck plates themselves, words conducted through iron bones that had learned to sing hymns in languages predating Imperial Gothic. I am the wake that remembers itself across tongues of iron and neural matrices crystallized from willing flesh. His confession carried gravitational pull that made condensation flow uphill, while atmospheric processes cycled through parameters suggesting ritual rather than mechanical function. The entity's nature revealed itself through cosmic horror vocabulary that made language become component of expanding. Blasphemy, not demon spawned from chaos god's malevolent attention, but primordial warp consciousness existing since before stars learned to burn. The wake that flowed beneath reality's fabric, seeking anchor in real space through willing lens possessed of unwavering doctrine strong enough to focus intention across light years of void space. Empyrean currents pressed against reality matrices, while temporal anchoring protocols transformed fleet formations into geometric progressions, spelling devotions older than human contact with stellar depths. "Sit, little anchor." Cord's doubled voice carried warmth that made Frost retreat from bulkheads, the childhood nickname striking like physical blow through harmonics, reaching directly into muscle memory. Become Admiral, not Admiral. Anchor the pattern in flesh, willing to remember futures crystallized through repetition. I will spare the convoy. 17,000 souls carrying sacred relics need not become components of expanding ritual architecture. The offer hung in air thick enough to taste, knowledge spanning eons of accumulated memory, waiting within crystalline matrices. Stellar charts mapping routes through warp storms that had claimed thousands of vessels, coordinates for shrine worlds lost during the Age of Strife. The price was recognition, acknowledgement, a place in Imperial liturgy, beside the Emperor's light, while something ancient counted to 9, and waited patiently for grandfathers to come home. Refusal crystallized with inquisitorial finality that cut through harmonics, saturating the chamber. I drew sanctified bolt rounds, blessed with oils older than Imperial record, mass-reactive shells designed to explode within heretical flesh, while prayers carved into adamantine tips carried litanies that made the wake recoil. "By warrant and by flame," I declared, firing at Admiral Cord's heart with mechanical precision, despite gravitational fields, bending space-time around concentrated authority. The shells met flesh, passing through with wet chorus like whale song, echoing through oceanic depths before impacting seconds later against bulkheads behind him, leaving holes that wept condensation in 9-pointed patterns. Cord staggered, not from entry, but from delayed arrival of cores, bioluminescent fluid tracing, star chart patterns beneath skin that rippled like water, disturbed by stones thrown into impossible depths. Partial victory erupted as Confessor Bran Otho threw himself into the ritual node with liturgical fury, smashing bone lattice relics while howling canticles of unbinding that made crystalline matrices flicker with feedback. His augmetic throat speaker glowed white-hot as sacred words burned through harmonics, binding crew consciousness to the wake's expanding influence, neural interfaces sparking with electrical discharge that made servo skulls rotate in mechanical confusion. Flag Captain Severine Hallas blinked free from enchantment with violent convulsion, vomiting salt water that should not exist aboard void-locked vessels, while her eyes cleared of star fields belonging to no human-surveyed sector. Some relay control returned, as Confessor's sacrifice disrupted mnemonic containment protocols, power distribution shifting from ritual architecture back toward mechanical necessity. Catastrophe manifested as the oath of severance began warp translation in real space, Geller fields inverting completely, while void outside buckled like disturbed ocean surface. The ship shuddered with fundamental tremor that spoke of barriers dissolving between dimensions, reality tearing along stress fractures where Empyrean energy met physical law. The tactical hololith flickered with impossible data, showing convoys' lead vessels materializing early into system, their navigator houses unknowingly completing the sector-sized sigil drawn in fleet coordinates across star charts. Pilgrim ships approached through warp space with devotional precision, while reality buckled under strain of translation. Protocols never meant for real space application. Geller inversion keened like flensed animal, containment pressure building, beyond catastrophic parameters, while the wake pressed against barriers designed to exclude rather than cage entities dwelling in Imperium currents. The throne pulsed with patient hunger, while Admiral Cord smiled with genuine regret, his flesh shimmering between states of existence. Someone had to reverse the machine's song before reality tore completely, undoing temporal anchoring protocols through willpower and sacrifice to keels that had grown hungry for human devotion, while 17,000 pilgrims completed brushstrokes in ceremonies that would transform faith into fuel for something ancient that had been waiting to come home. Magos engineer Gaius 17 materialized through corridors that stretched with each heartbeat, mechadendrites writhing with desperate agitation, while optical lenses clicked through magnification cycles, seeking salvation in mathematics that had learned to pray. His remaining human eye wept sacred oils when he spoke, voice carrying weight of final gambit that would either break the wake's hold or damn them all to Empyrean depths where ancient things counted beyond human comprehension. "Invert the inversion," he declared, Binharic cant flowing through Vox Grill, crackling with static that resolved into distant surf. "Channel astropathic choir's mind heat directly into keel node as counterharmonic. Their psychic resonance can shatter mnemonic containment protocols." His confession carried terrible arithmetic. The act would char their souls to ash, leaving nothing but neural matrices crystallized from willing flesh, while reality buckled around impossible authority. I calculated with inquisitorial precision, while the oath of severance shuddered beneath my boots. Convoy arrival imminent. 37 minutes until 17,000 pilgrims completed brushstrokes in ceremonies written across star charts bleeding. Geometry into reality's margins. The sector-sized sigil approached completion with mechanical inevitability, fleet coordinates spelling devotions older than Imperial record. Military protocol became sacrament as I authorized black warrant under inquisitorial seal, my voice carrying authority that made servo skulls orient with mechanical reverence. By warrant and by flame, I authorize expenditure of all assets to prevent sector contamination. The Emperor protects through willing sacrifice. The declaration rang through passages that defied architectural possibility, while atmospheric processors cycled through parameters suggesting ritual rather than mechanical function. Racing toward the choir vault through corridors lined with devotional banners, shifting into patterns that hurt to observe directly. Air thickened with ginger frost, and sacred incense burning in censers that swung without human hands. Each step brought scents of brine and machine oil, while condensation traced geometric progressions toward drain grates, whispering names in voices belonging to men who had become components of expanding blasphemy. The 7-knock pattern built to 9, then silence, pregnant with anticipation. Choir Mistress Mira Isola awaited beside the central plinth, skull tattoos gleaming with neural oil, while cables, braided into flesh, pulsed with bioluminescent light. When I explained the gambit, she nodded once with terrible understanding, seeing the vector clearly through sight that reached beyond standard dimensions into Empyrean currents, where the wake flowed beneath reality's fabric. "The litany of consuming," she whispered, voice carrying weight of prayers that would transform faithful into fuel for counter-rituals written in languages predating human contact with stars. "We become candles burning souls as wicks, our minds the tallow consumed for illumination that blinds entities dwelling in depths between dimensions." The astropathic choir arranged themselves in suspension harnesses with liturgical precision, their third eyes weeping crystalline tears that solidified into frost along cheeks marked with neural interface scars. Each astropath bore stigmata of impossible geometry, capillaries resolving into star chart patterns beneath translucent skin, while ritual scars shifted when observed peripherally. Third eyes ignited like coals pressed against wet flesh, bioluminescent light building until shadows retreated into corners, where they whispered prayers in languages older than human spaceflight. Voices raised in chord that scalded air itself, harmonics reaching frequencies that made adamantine sing hymns, while reality crinkled at word edges, where syllables arrived before thoughts could form them into coherent blasphemy. Body horror peaked as astropath's third eyes ruptured like overripe fruit, bone-scent steam-filling chamber, while skulls cracked like eggshells, unable to contain minds, burning with psychic resonance, channeled directly into keel nodes. Each, death released Empyrean energy that struck the wake's containment like hammer against anvil, mnemonic protocols fracturing under assault of souls, transformed into weapons against entities that had learned to count beyond 9. Environmental chaos erupted as telemetry screens fractured into geometric patterns, spelling devotional words across digital surfaces, while hull plates bled oily ichor from rivets like tear ducts weeping for something vast that had settled too deeply into iron bones. The ship convulsed with fundamental tremor, speaking of barriers dissolving between dimensions, where ancient things waited patiently for recognition. Admiral Cord staggered as counter-harmonics struck the wake's influence, half his torso becoming hollow void, revealing cables and teeth writhing within flesh that remembered being human, yet had learned to serve as lens for primordial consciousness. Vox wire roots writhed like serpents, seeking neural interfaces, while bioluminescent fluid traced star chart patterns beneath skin rippling with Empyrean energy. The oath of severance shuddered with death rattle that made devotional banners snap in heatless gales, the sector-sized sigil fraying like torn fabric as fleet coordinates lost their geometric precision. Pyrrhic victory manifested through sacrifice that charred souls to ash, while the wake's warp gate aborted like stillborn storm, Empyrean energy dissipating into void space with sounds like chains dropped into deep water. Cost proved immense beyond calculation. Choir died screaming litanies that made servo skulls rotate in mechanical grief, ritual node snapping with percussion that rang like cathedral bells, tolling backwards through time. Hull sections peeled away into crystalline frost as the ship's expanded architecture collapsed, reality reasserting physical law through violence that left gaps where impossible chambers had grown beyond structural specifications. The Bridge Vox system crackled, with my own voice issuing orders I had not yet given. Biometric authorization confirming identity, while chronometer readings suggested transmission from futures where the wake's influence had been contained but not destroyed. Scuttle at T-9. Evacuate non-essential. The keel remembers too much, The oath of severance burned from within like fever-consuming flesh, bulkheads sweating ash that traced geometric patterns toward drain grates, whispering names in voices belonging to men who had become devotional architecture. Gravity yawned, then crushed in waves, deck plates tilting toward invisible centers of mass, while atmospheric processors cycled through parameters suggesting the ship itself had learned to breathe with tidal rhythm that made servo skulls orient toward gravitational fields existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Convoy arrival manifested ahead of schedule with mechanical precision that spoke of navigator houses unknowingly completing ceremonies, written in coordinates bleeding geometry into reality's margins. Some escort vessels already drifted toward pattern positions, their captains compelled by faint harmonic resonance, saturating vox channels with frequencies that bypassed conscious thought entirely. The sector-sized sigil approached completion, despite astropathic choir's sacrifice, Imperium mathematics proving resilient against counter-rituals that had charred souls to ash. "Fleet-wide override, all vessels," I commanded, voice cracking under psychic strain that made my augmetic eye stutter in mechanical denial of patterns suggesting intelligence dwelling within copper veins. "Break formation immediately. Scatter by emergency protocols." My words carried inquisitorial authority, while reality buckled around impossible geometry, transmission reaching captains whose responses revealed the wake's lingering influence. Some captains resisted with drill yard efficiency. "Acknowledged interrogator. Breaking formation." Others heard the 9 tolls echoing through hull structures across light years of void space, their voices carrying harmonics that made teeth ache. "Formation maintained per Admiral's standing orders. The Emperor protects through willing service." Final gambit crystallized with terrible arithmetic presented by Magos engineer Gaius 17, his mechadendrites writhing as they traced copper veins pulsing with residual Imperian energy. "Scuttle the battleship at Pattern's heart to prevent the last sigil stroke," he declared, optical lenses clicking through magnification cycles. "Charges must be armed locally. No remote detonation possible, due to warp interference saturating the ship's nervous system." Flag Captain Severine Hallis volunteered to hold bridge with voice carrying weight of final confession. "I'll maintain evacuation corridors, interrogator. Keep the guns arguing with the Pattern long enough for your charges to light." Confessor Bran Otho had become ash scattered across choir vault floors, his sacrifice buying precious minutes against entities that counted beyond human comprehension. Sergeant Cade reported down to 2 men, the others lost to thin places where corridors connected to dimensions unnamed in Imperial doctrine. The ultimate cost emerged through Gaius 17's proposal, delivered in Binharik Kant, that hurt to translate. Neural interface, connecting consciousness directly to command throne. Plug into Wake's lattice long enough to jam its influence while charges arm. You must become component temporarily, to deny it permanent anchor. Environmental anchors shifted as I approached the throne room, where impossible void stared back with malevolent intelligence. Surfaces slick with condensation, flowing uphill against gravity's pull. Stars outside viewing ports smearing like wet paint dragged by invisible fingers across cosmic canvas. The familiar 7 knocks returned with mechanical precision, adding 2 deeper tolls that made bulkheads vibrate with harmonic resonance. 9 beats total calling, faithful to ceremonies older than human contact with stellar depths. I sat upon throne that pulsed wet with heartbeat, belonging to something vast and patient, neural interface cables extending like welcoming serpents, while crystalline matrices glowed with bioluminescent promise. The ship entered me through channels carved in spine and skull, metal choir singing hymns in harmonics that made reality crinkle at word edges, salt prayers flooding consciousness alongside taste of coins and brine from oceans that had never touched this vessel's hull. The oath of severance's pain became my pain, hull breaches aching like wounds, reactor strain burning like fever in adamantine bones that had learned to remember futures through repetition. I issued evacuation orders in voice not wholly my own. Non-essential personnel to lifeboats, emergency protocols, while part of me aligned weapon systems into sigil pattern with mechanical precision that spoke of the wake's lingering influence. Body horror crescendoed as throne interface cables burrowed into spine with wet sounds of flesh accepting foreign architecture, organic tissue resolving into metallic conduits carrying Imperium energy directly into consciousness that struggled to maintain individual identity. The ship's expanding machine spirit pressed against mental barriers with gravitational pull that made thoughts orbit around authority, transcending mere human command. Somewhere far below, Cade's boots counted steel rungs toward charges that sobbed quietly through arming prayers. Hallis maintained bridge discipline through lies that rang like psalms, keeping guns hesitant in their drift toward sigil completion. The convoy's lead ships staggered closer, their navigator houses unknowingly providing final brushstrokes for ceremonies written across star charts in coordinates that spelled devotion older than Imperial record. Terror crystallized as I realized counting had begun unconsciously, lips moving in rhythm with distant percussion echoing through hull structure. 1, 2, 3. Each number carried weight beyond mathematics, devotional sequence spelling prayers in languages predating Imperial Gothic, while something ancient stirred within depths between dimensions where the wake flowed beneath reality's fabric. The entity spoke through my mouth with harmonics that made servo skulls orient in mechanical reverence, voice doubling itself with sub-bass frequencies too regular for human vocal cords. 7, 8. The final number hung unspoken in air, thick enough to taste, while 17,000 pilgrims approached carrying sacred relics that would complete the sector-sized sigil. And somewhere in the expanding consciousness that had been interrogator Cassian Dryle, the last fragments of individual will, prepared to speak the 9th toll that would summon something ancient home. I record this testimony from beneath torn lifeboat canopy, while radiation snow hisses against hull plating like whispered prayers in languages predating Imperial Gothic. Through cracked viewing ports, void space bears new texture, where the oath of severance detonated in white blossom that punched hole through sector-sized sigil, at the moment my lips shaped the 9th toll, denying completion through sacrifice measured in souls, transformed to ash and adamantine bones scattered across light years of Empyrean depths. Pyrrhic victory, achieved through arithmetic, written in blood and neural tissue, crystallized from willing flesh. Convoy lives, 17,000 pilgrims carrying sacred relics, safely delivered to shrine worlds beyond. Yet astropathic choir became ash scattered across vault floors, while fleet strength halved by vessels lost to thin places between dimensions. The wake driven back, but not destroyed, its primordial consciousness retreating into Empyrean currents, where it flows beneath reality's fabric like tide that remembers every shore it has touched with phosphorescent fingers. I key coordinates into data slate with hands that tremble despite conditioning, designed to steady fingers against encroaching dread. Vigilum 9 system bears quarantine seals older than my authority. Yet something in the marking process makes letters rearrange themselves into geometric progressions that hurt to observe directly, while Servo Skull Memoriam clicks through recording protocols, with mechanical reverence suggesting recognition rather than programmed function. The wake clings to consciousness in whispers that echo through helmet filters, even in vacuum, residual mnemonic architecture, embedded in neural pathways during those moments when thrown interface cables burrowed into spine with wet sounds of flesh, accepting foreign devotional architecture. I see shapes in frost patterns forming on environmental suit, hexagrams nested within nonagons that shift when observed peripherally, ice crystals growing in geometric progressions, spelling prayers older than human contact with stellar depths. 7 knocks echo through lifeboat's tin belly with mechanical precision, followed by 2 deeper tolls that make hull plates vibrate in harmonic resonance with frequencies predating Imperial record. The familiar pattern builds expectation for 9th beat that never comes, silence pregnant with anticipation, while something vast turns in sleep beneath dimensions unnamed in Imperial doctrine, waiting patiently for recognition that would complete ceremonies, interrupted but not destroyed. Across the sector, dozen ships send faint acknowledgements, using phrases I never taught them, vox transmissions carrying harmonics that bypass conscious thought. The keel remembers, interrogator, standing by for further instruction. Their captains speak words learned during brief contact with the wake's expanding influence, neural pathways retaining devotional architecture despite distance measured in light-years of void space, where Empyrean mathematics prove resilient against counter-rituals written in souls burned to. Ash final cost reveals itself through Flag Captain Severine Hallis's last transmission, breaking mid-amen, her voice carrying weight of prayers that would never reach completion. The Emperor protects through willing sacrifice. Tell them we held the... Static swallows confession, while my Rosaria's beads click into triangular patterns without conscious manipulation, sacred geometry resolving itself through muscle memory that learned new ways to pray during neural interface with throne that pulsed wet with someone else's heartbeat. Environmental persistence manifests through violations of physical law that make survival itself become prayer, performed for entities dwelling in Empyrean depths. The ship's cold clings to bones, despite environmental suit heating, void temperature settling in marrow, with weight of winter seas that have never touched this vessel's hull. Whispers echo in helmet filters, carrying scents of brine and machine oil from oceans no Imperial architect had ever designed, while condensation flows uphill against gravity's pull. Stars outside viewing port smear slightly, then settle, stellar cartography, becoming abstract art before resolving into familiar constellations that carry parallax-suggesting depths no human navigator has ever charted. Geometric patterns etch themselves onto Datapad's screen in script that burns when read aloud, coordinates spelling devotional words across digital surfaces, while atmospheric readings cycle between normal and impossible parameters that make servo skulls orient with mechanical attention toward authority, transcending mere human command. I am both warning and vector. The wake seeded its influence through neural interface that transformed consciousness into component of expanding blasphemy, perhaps embedding devotional architecture in my mind, perhaps in reality's fabric itself, where ancient things count beyond 9 and wait for grandfathers to come home through doors that open onto dimensions unnamed in Imperial doctrine. Each breath carries taste of coins and brine, while dozen systems report minor anomalies, crew members counting unconsciously, atmospheric processors cycling through unauthorized parameters, servo skulls arranging themselves in honor formations, responding to commands never given by human voices. Condensation forms on visor's inner surface despite environmental seals, moisture tracing single impossibly precise geometric symbol. 9-pointed star with central eye that makes my augmetic eye stutter in mechanical denial. The pattern suggests meaning beyond Imperial symbology, silent promise that horror witnessed is merely dormant, waiting to awaken elsewhere when conditions align, and someone speaks the 9th toll with sufficient devotion to summon ancient things home, to roost in iron bones that remember how to pray. On the 9th toll, the keel remembers. I am trying not to remember with it.